Welcome to Fast Effect Double Speed Magic the Gathering. Here we have Charlie on an Esper Mentor deck versus Tyler on what he is calling Tefericles. I'm not sure that I get the reference. Presumably it'll have Teferi in it. Is he the best Planeswalker left in Legacy? I don't know. I mean, Narset's incredibly strong. Karn, Dak may see some play now that Oko is out of the format. I mean, at 3 mana, Oko was the king. And we've got a Hymn to Torok from Charlie. That Ponder looked to improve Tyler's hand, but now it's going to get taken down a notch with this Hymn to Torok. Card's been causing damage since 94. Occasionally snagging your opponent's only other lands, leaving them land screwed. And there's so many ways that this can go badly. And he's got a Terminus and a Scalding Tarn going to the bin. That value is tough to argue with. Card advantage, part of Magic theory, even from the early days with Oscar Tan's Control Player's Bible. Just that idea that if you are able to trade card for card over the course of a long game, and at the end of it get some 2-for-1s along the way, when the dust settles, your opponent will have no cards in hand, and you'll have 2 or 3 cards to reward you for your hard work, and that should be enough to carry you to victory. Very often in those scenarios, nobody has any creatures left, and it's been just a real war of attrition, and Hymn to Torok, pretty brutal in those games. Now, an interesting downside of that, what do we have here? That looks like... Yeah, I don't actually recognize this card. It looks like... It's going to draw a couple of cards. All right, let me know what that card drawing effect was. And Counterbalance coming down, which quickly sees a Force of Will battle, force pitching that blue card. And Counterbalance sticks. That can be another form of card advantage over the course of a long game. Now, in the past, Counterbalance was a straight-up lock. Using Sensei's Divining Top, you're going to ensure that your opponent can't play any typically 1, 2, or 3 casting cost cards. And of course, you have Counter Magic to counter any higher casting cost effects that might be an issue. At that point, you also don't need Brainstorm to be used quite so aggressively, so you can sit back and potentially brainstorm a copy of your own Jace or Force of Will on top of your library if need be. We've got Snapcaster Mage looking to create some value. And Tyler's going to have 2 chances. One is going to be to hit the Snapcaster, and the other is going to be whatever it's trying to flash back. No, it looks like he bobbles himself. Gets to draw. And Snapcaster's on board. This could actually make a big difference. It's not super intuitive, as control decks are so well equipped to handle opposing creatures. But sometimes in a control matchup, you can slip through a threat like a Snapcaster Mage. You can end up doing a massive amount of damage before you necessarily answer it. So often you're going to be prioritizing counter spells and card drawing over, like a Swords to Plowshares in this type of matchup, which can end up being dead. However, Tyler does actually have the answer for it. Really, card advantage is the key here. Whether or not you're winning or losing by casting Swords to Plowshares generally is all about whoever has the most cards. Going to trigger Counterbalance and Brainstorming in response. So this Inquisition of Kozilek is going to get countered. Almost certainly. Tyler likely already had a 1-mana spell in his hand. And there it is. A Swords to Plowshares, which is just going to be waiting around. Tyler now knows the top card of his library, which he can shuffle away. But he's going to keep it. And it looks like it's Entreat the Angels, which meets a hard cast force. So a couple of angels attempting to be made. So there's a trigger. And the trigger is being responded to with a fetch. So Tyler technically can't Force of Will yet as the spell hasn't been played. Now the land's in play. Tyler tapping all of his mana. And now Charlie has the option to Force of Will. And will it be fought over is the question. To land on top of the library. And he does have a Force pitching Counterbalance. Cards some good. You know, those extra redundant copies not really helpful in this type of matchup, so being able to pitch them to Force of Will just feels fantastic. And we've got a Fatal Push and a Swords to Plowshares, taking out both of those tokens now that the coast is clear. That land on top of the library. Just 2 cards left in Charlie's hand, facing down a Counterbalance, but still no clock on either side. Tyler attempting to get some board presence going with that Entreat the Angels, but Charlie with that previously dead removal able to just throw those out pretty easily. Ponder here, which I don't know how I feel about just throwing out a Ponder in the middle of the game like this when you're going draw go. Really, Tyler's not at that much of an advantage. Sometimes you're able to use a Ponder to set off a situation where you can potentially throw a variety of different mana costs out there. Potentially playing around the Counterbalance, and now Jace. Alright, so Charlie boldly going for it and really being rewarded. He ponders and gets a Jace down. And he can tuck that to Fury. And at this point, Tyler is going to need some type of threat to get rid of this Jace, which is one of the better cards in this type of matchup. Just being able to Fate Seal your opponent will eventually win you the game. Whereas Brainstorm can provide just an insurmountable amount of card advantage over time. We've got Teferi. And Tyler just needs a body more than anything. And a Predict. It looked like he only got 1 card off of that. I don't think he knew what the top of the library was. That's an interesting decision. Tyler really feeling some pressure here. Facing down the Jace. And now a Ponder. Yeah, if you only got 1 card off of that, that is surprising. There's really just not that much necessary in order to get to the point where you can get the extra card. Even something like a Counterbalance trigger can give you that insight into the top of your library and ensure that Predict draws 2 cards instead of 1. Of course, Ponder, Brainstorm, Preordain if he's running that. Any of those can give you that extra card. Can make it worth holding off. We've got an Inquisition triggering Counterbalance. Oh, does he not Counterbalance here? The Mentor on top gets put on the bottom. So he knew it was a 3 casting cost on top, I suppose. Teferi ticking up. Jace ramping up his loyalty as well. And he has a game-winning ultimate. That is not hyperbole. I mean, Teferi feels like he wins the game when he draws your second card most of the time. I mean, coming down, bouncing a problem permanent, and then protecting all of your counter spells, and then drawing another card. I mean, very often in the game that feels like winning, but Jace's ultimate does pretty much win the game, unless you're really far behind on board. And here's that unknown 3 casting cost spell. Yeah, I'm surprised I don't know what this card is. I am sure I will be told in the comments. And Force of Will denying that extra card drawing, but Teferi isn't going to be able to deal with this Jace. He's going to need some help. Some type of creature. Maybe a Council's Judgment. Teferi ultimate, and that is going to do it. Wow. Jace sticks the landing and then continues to ramp up the whole way as Tyler just has to watch in horror as his library is exiled and his hand gets shuffled in. Scooping it up and moving on to the next game. Wild. Starting out here, game 2, Tyler with a fetch for a ponder. Basic island. Perhaps signaling that he's going to have some back to basics shenanigans, or perhaps playing around Charlie's potential back to basics. When you know for certainty that that's not going to be an issue, then those dual lands are going to be way better, but it is pretty brutal to get blown out by that card. Now Esper Mentor. Oh, by the way, it is Of One Mind, I believe the name of the card is, if nobody said it in the comments. Of One Mind, going to be draw 2, as we saw. It's a sorcery speed spell, and if you have a human and a non-human creature, costs 2 less. So 3 mana to draw 2. We've seen that for years. That's not a big deal, but 1 blue to draw 2? I mean, that would be one of the best Magic cards ever printed. Wow, without the conditional clause there. So, sure. Funny thing about that is monk tokens are actually not humans. They're just monks for whatever reason. So a Monastery Mentor plus a monk token will actually turn that online. So Charlie's got a Meddling Mage now. And he is up a game. We'll go ahead and mark that. I appreciate the effort, Charlie, but I cannot read that. Maybe somebody can make that out. Get some CSI style forensics going. Get a screenshot, play with the levels. Now we've got Narset, who can draw a card, but Tyler opting not to. She's going to take a hit. And him to Torok. So this Narset not drawing a card, kind of working out. And the dice leave Tyler with just 1 card. Now he'll get a card for turn and can draw with Narset. Force of Will. Few cards can hold on to a lead like Force of Will. Pondering. And fetching. Yeah, Narset is incredibly strong. In Vintage, I mean, she became like the metagame. It started out preordains were a pretty reasonable way to fight against the other non-blue decks in the format. just having that extra consistency because, you lost Brainstorm and Ponder, but a full play set of preordains really started doing some heavy lifting. And then with the printing of Narset, people started ramping up on the number of Narsets, and then it just got to the point where you should just be running 4 Narsets, which then, of course, makes red a great splash because you have Red Elemental or Pyroblast that you can then find with your Narsets to keep your opponent's Narsets down. And, of course, you can draw cards with your Narsets while they have Narsets. So, yeah, it was a weird meta for a little while in Vintage. Did not seem to have, it did not have nearly the same impact in Legacy. The overall power level of the cards that you're finding a bit more subdued than Vintage. You don't have 2-mana Time Walks and 1-mana Ancestral Recalls that you can potentially draw into. Even something like a Black Lotus completely changed the face of the game. Creates much higher variance. Which, is something people love about Commander, is just the crazy variance. You have a 100-card singleton deck. You're going to see a lot of variety in games. Would really like to see more of Tyler's list. To be fair, I did get to see Charlie's list on MTG Top 8. We are listing all of our events on there. We've got Wednesdays and Fridays. And a Narset of his own. Able to dig. Finding a Force of Will. It's got that beautiful anime art from those Japanese War of the Spark boxes. Wish I had a larger position in those. I really thought I was going to get like 40 boxes from my distributor, and they completely cut my throat. I was very disappointed with that. Was not able to get them. And they have done well since that point, but that would have been really, really strong. I think the Narset lottery is going to be, or I guess it's actually the Liliana lottery, but both of those cards, very, very strong. Mostly the Lily. That is a type of reserve list. It is extremely unlikely that they'll ever reprint that card with that art. Not a lot of incentive to. At the end of the day, I think when we're talking about reserve list cards and whether or not to reprint or not, for everybody to get what they want out of the game, I think ultimately is going to require a little bit of a concession from people that want reprints of absolutely everything all the time. I don't think it's a reasonable perspective. I think you're going to need some things that just don't get reprinted. And then, things like dual lands. If you're a Commander player and you really want dual lands, good news is there's a absolute ton of dual lands of a variety of types. They're just not the original revised duals, but you've got your shocks, your fetches, your triomes. It's an endless list. You can absolutely build a functional deck without the absolute best of the best. And, if you want the absolute best, then you step up and you get the real deal. Lots of people love car shows. Doesn't mean that everybody just has an inherent right to own a Corvette. If you want it, you actually do need to buy it. And Tyler, at this point, him to Turok, wiping out all of his hope. Charlie showing he's got a surgical as well. An interesting card in control matchups. Can really go well in small quantities when paired with hymns and targeted discard. And that is an interesting list for Charlie. Got off on a little bit of a rant there, but wasn't too much with the in-game action. Hopefully you guys don't mind, and we will see you on the next one. That is all for this one, but don't worry, there is a lot more. You can check out our older videos, and we're always putting out new videos from ELD's Time Vault Games in Bellingham, Massachusetts. If you want to help the channel, of course, you can like, subscribe, share, tap that notification bell so you can know the next time our new videos come out. Thanks for watching.